Hey, deserving listeners, I thought at the very end of this very long journey that we've all gone on together, I would present my final thoughts on season 6 of Love is Blind. Someone suggested a while back that I do this at the end of watching a season of whatever I'm watching, and I thought it was a good idea. So, and I don't remember who that person was, so I'm sorry for not remembering, but let's talk about Amy and Johnny first. So, I don't have a lot of final thoughts other than positive thoughts. By all accounts, they are both wonderful people and they're a very good couple. The edit presents it that way, and the cast will talk about them that way. You know, at the reunion when Trevor is saying, Johnny, you remember how upset I was? And Johnny's like, yep, I remember. And Trevor's like, see, everyone's going to believe him, right? And people laugh. Also, their families seem to be very positive about them, their friends, and also my contact on the show said, by all accounts, they're wonderful people. So that's great. Now, we can't know, just like when there are negative things portrayed, we can't really know if we're getting the full picture. When there are good people seemingly being portrayed, we can't know necessarily. But looks like things are on the positive side for sure. And we really only saw like a couple conflicts, and those conflicts didn't exhibit the problems that we might see in other couples. Like when they were in the pool, I didn't really note this at the time, but looking back, I think it is notable that, you know, Amy and Johnny are in the pool during the getaway, and Amy is saying, hey, if my dad doesn't approve of this union, then I will have to back out. Now, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't, but it probably didn't happen. Didn't happen in the edit, where we didn't see Johnny have any kind of reaction against that. That says potentially a lot of things. It says that he isn't overly reactive, because I'm guessing that hurt him. I'm guessing that concerned him. But he didn't overreact, or he was able to, you know, hold on to that feeling for later or something, or table it for now or whatever. You know, that's a sign of someone that was raised relatively well and or went through a lot of work themselves or whatever, such that you can have a pretty big thing get dropped in the middle of that conversation and zoom out and take a survey of the big picture, which is, well, that's worrisome to me, but really what's happening right now is my fiance is telling me about something that she is very concerned about, something I can't relate to, but it's very important to her, and she's vulnerable right now, and I'm not picking up the message that she doesn't want to be with me. What she's telling me is that her relationship with her family and her father are very important to her. That's the bigger picture here, right? So there's a lot of complicated things that are happening in your mind in a situation like that, and for him to navigate it such that there's, at least on the edit, no reaction from him when with other couples, often I think about this happening on 90 Day Fiancé, right? There's often a pretty big negative. It's usually like an American person with a non-American person, and the non-American person is saying, if my parents don't approve, then I can't marry you. And then the American person is just like, I hate you for that. I'm simplifying. It's not always the case, but you know that is sometimes the case. And I'm always thinking, did you not know that the person who is in another culture comes from another culture? Did you think that everyone was American or everyone was the same as Americans? And some Americans think this way too. So it's like, think outside of, you can disagree with it. You can think that it's wrong. You could think that it's not the way you want to live, but that's the reality. You can't just like yell at culture and have it go away. So we didn't see any of that from Johnny. All right, so let's move on to AD and Clay. I'm going in order of people that got as close to marriage as possible. So Amy and Johnny get married. AD and Clay got to the altar, so they're next. And what I'll say in my notes, I took notes about all this. I wanted to be organized with these final thoughts. That if we believe Clay, at least most of what he was saying throughout the season and at the reunion, then he definitely wins the Most Improved award, right? There were so many positives and so many strengths again, if we believe most, if not all, of what he was presenting to us, and according to the survey, I think most of you do believe him, we see tremendous vulnerability, tremendous honesty when he didn't need to be, especially in front of the camera. We also saw a lot of compassion. You could argue that him talking about his worries of cheating was compassionate because he didn't want to harm AD. Hard to say, but we definitely saw compassion at the wedding after they broke up. We don't normally see the people who say no at the altar. We don't normally see them approach the other person and say that they're sorry and try to explain and care for the other person. I'm thinking of, like, in terms of my memory anyway, Stacy and Izzy. I don't seem to remember having that same feeling. Bartice went to Nancy, but you could argue he could have been nicer. Also, he, I think, might have led Nancy on. At least I think that was the accusation. I can go through the rest of the list, but we saw what I thought to be really a high level of very uncomplicated, pure compassion for AD. Could it be faked? Sure, but if we believe him, I think there's a lot of positives there. However, having said all that, behind the scenes, he might be actually problematic. I don't know the percentage chance of this, but there's a chance that he actually has strong objectification impulses, strong cheating impulses, strong impulses that don't involve caring about other people's feelings. And it wouldn't be hard for him to present well for the limited time that he was on camera, because he was often off working, right? It wouldn't be hard for someone to present well, particularly given the mode that it looks like he has, of a salesman mode, right? I'm guessing he developed that salesman mode because, something involving his childhood, of course, but we don't have to look far in terms of the limited information we have about his childhood for a good hypothesis. He had to sell his mom that his dad wasn't cheating. Just think about that. I don't know, but I think the dad brought Clay because the dad wanted an alibi. He wasn't bringing Clay for fun, I don't think. I don't know, but that's not typically what happens. So I think he was bringing Clay, at least partially, if not wholly, because he wanted Clay to lie to the mom. And so if that's true, which I don't know, Clay is absorbing that, getting attention for that, getting love for that, comes home. He has to, from a very early age, be very good at lying, at coming across as believable, at having ways of convincing. Also, I'm guessing his dad was also like that, because dad would come home, dad and Clay would come home. Just imagine that. And they have to sell as a team to mom and wife, mom, wife, that they were doing something else. So we don't have to look far. And I think that if that were needed to be used as a way to come across in front of the cameras as someone that doesn't have a problem, and those things that we did see of the objectification and all those other kind of problems that we saw were his naivete or his impulse or drive sneaking through that veil of being a salesman. According to the survey, I don't think most people believe that, but it is true. None of us would know. I hope that's not true. I don't think it's true, but it could be true. Plus, my contact on the show said that he reportedly was spotted with another woman after the getaway, during the engagement with AD. But we don't know who this woman was. My contact was clear and said we never asked him or the woman what was going on. It could have been a friend. Who knows? But the other detail was my contact said that Clay had lied and that he said he was working in another part of the region, and then someone, I think on production, saw him in town with another woman. Certainly doesn't look good, Also, my contact said that Clay got a really good edit. For example, she told me that they had a pretty bad fight just before the soup scene, if not two fights. And from the sound of it, what my contact was saying, it sounded like another fight about AD's body, and perhaps an even worse fight than the gym fight. And the gym fight wasn't really a fight, but, and I guess that's important, is that, the gym conversation happened at the beginning of the getaway, and then the soup scene, I think, was next, or at least soon after that. So if we see after the gym conversation, AD, although might be somewhat concerned, somewhat miffed by it, it didn't seem to end super negatively. But by the time we see AD at the soup thing, AD is clearly upset and angry at him. So the fight, if it did happen, must have been much worse than the gym conversation, which is hard to imagine, but might be not that hard to imagine. But overall, I would say for Clay, I'm guessing he's on a good path. I'm hoping he's on a good path. And I would guess that he did go on the show with good intentions. At the same time, one could say, even if you believe everything he said, it is a viable criticism to him to say, hey, I get you and I understand you. I believe everything you're saying. If we could rewind time, we probably would tell you, well, you're not really ready. You want to be ready, and I believe you. And you might have been ready, but you didn't have enough to go off of to believe that you were actually ready. And you should wait, because if you fall in love with someone and they're a yes at the altar and you're a no, and there were lots of indications that you knew about yourself prior to even agreeing to go on the show, that no matter who you meet, you might say no. It's commendable that you want to grow and you want to challenge yourself, but that's unfair to other people. Yeah, I think you could say that. Okay, with AD, the first thing I want to talk about are the seemingly two modes that she goes into. I can't know, but in terms of the edit, she clearly has one mode of being mature and healthy and differentiated and assertive and yet fair about her assertiveness, etc. Like when she confronted Sarah, I know a lot of people thought that she was overly harsh with Sarah, but I know a lot of people that didn't think that. And yeah, I didn't think that. I thought that Sarah could have easily won AD over to some extent if Sarah would have just said, you know what, AD, I think you're right. Now that I think about it, I think I shouldn't have sent that text. Let me tell you where I was coming from. I was lonely, But yeah, okay, I guess I shouldn't have said it. I think if Sarah would have said anything along those lines, or even something a little further back from that, I think AD would have resolved it at that point. But the fact that Sarah kept digging in, and I think AD wasn't going to take that, because it didn't make a lot of sense. And it didn't make a lot of sense to me that Sarah would dig in that moment. I don't think Sarah had to fall on her sword, but at least some acknowledgement of, oh, okay, I didn't think about that. I didn't want to make Laura feel that way, or whatever. It's not hard. I think I said during that reaction episode of, like, you don't have to agree with someone to have compassion and understanding and to allow for the possibility that they're right, especially in a moment like that. She could have said something like, well, I have an impulse to defend myself right now because that feels right to me, but I know from experience that if I sit on this for a while, I might actually come around and agree with you. So I don't know what to say right now, but I'll definitely think about it and I'll give it my best shot to understand. Let me tell you where I was coming from. At the very least, I can say that I didn't want to bother anybody. I really thought I wasn't going to bother anybody, but I did, and I'm really going to think about what you're saying to me right now. Yeah, say something like that. But anyway, so I thought AD with Sarah was assertive and fair. She handled herself way better than I could have. When I'm in a situation like that, my heart starts to pump, adrenaline starts going, and I have a heart. Now with clients, it's easier, but in my private life, to confront someone like that, I think it would be hard for me. There have been times when I've been okay, like when I confronted my first supervisor. I feel pretty good about that. Anyway, when I confronted my first supervisor like 20 years after the fact. You can read about it in my book. It's in the first chapter. Anyway, also I thought she was in this mode of healthy mode, AD, when she stood up for herself with Clay. And I think that she also was very healthy in helping him with his issues. Now, we talk about overfunctioning and codependency. Also, I thought it was very commendable and healthy of her and differentiated of her during their reunion when, this could just be being me interpreting it in a certain direction, but I interpreted what AD was saying at the reunion about Chelsea. Prior to watching the show, I believed everything you were telling me about your experience with Jimmy. After watching the show, I am now saying, wow, that's a lot. AD was careful with her words, but I think what she was saying is, I don't know if she would say, Chelsea, you lied to me, but the story you were telling me and the rest of it, because there's in-groups of women and men. We've seen it play out in other seasons. And for AD to allow for that internally and also to state it, I think shows a lot of differentiation. Think about with Zeneb and Cole during that season, and there was a lot of criticism online, and I think there's a kernel of justification there that everyone believed Zeneb's story that Cole was not only just a problem but a monster. And I think that Chelsea was saying those things. I mean, just imagine the kinds of things she was saying. If she was distorted on camera, imagine what she was telling people. And it's not uncommon for that to happen given the profile that I hypothesize is at play. And for the season with Zeneb and Cole, even after watching the show, they hadn't seen the cuties scene, of course, but they had seen the show. They, at the reunion, were still standing by all of the narrative that Zeneb had about Cole. And maybe Cole was easier to do that too, because Jimmy, when you watch him on the show, it's hard to, I think, because, Cole had actual problems, calling her bipolar. Anyway, point is it's very commendable that AD did that. We don't usually see that kind of thing. She didn't have to do it. She could have just not brought it up. But by saying that, I think I don't know, it just says something. It shows integrity, I think. So that's one mode. The other mode is very different. I don't know if I would say opposite, but a very different mode, seemingly, where she's overly compliant. She's whispering. She's almost like a child. She's almost begging in a way. I don't know if begging is a good word, but it was very literally whispering. We saw it in the pods with Matthew, particularly during the conflictual moments. We saw it at the wedding, after the wedding with Clay, when Clay goes into the room to comfort her. We see it when the relationship seemingly was starting to drift apart, just before the wedding. When they would get together, she would just seemingly just put herself aside. And it's not a volitional thing, understand. It's probably an adaptation, to danger. I don't know if abuse, but some sort of danger, some sort of threat. I remember thinking this word mousy in the pods when she was with Matthew. I remember thinking she has like a real mousy side. And given how strong and healthy and differentiated she is normally, it's very easy to see that transition because it's so different. And when I think about that adaptation, it gives me a vibe of someone that's trying to be invisible and someone that's trying to be as compliant as possible and avoid being harmed. And maybe particularly around men, because we don't have much data, but with AD, she goes up against Sarah and presents nothing like that. There are even moments with Clay, like with the gym conversation, where she shows none of that mousiness, none of that overcompliance. But I think when there is danger perceived or abandonment perceived, then this mode kicks in of overly compliant, begging, almost like she doesn't exist, like her needs don't exist, And it had that look to it. I don't know, but it did have that look to it. She could also just have complicated feelings about a variety of things, and I'm just interpreting it a different way. So the theory area that I think of when I think about what I'm saying right here is what we call modes within schemas, the schema therapy modes. I don't often talk about modes specifically. I'll often talk about schemas, but basically in a nutshell, I'm describing modes, that you have a strong mode, or maybe schema therapists would say that the healthy differentiated part of her is actually the true her. And that mousy part is a mode that she resorts to under stress. If you know internal family systems, if you know parts work within Gestalt or other humanistic therapies, it's all basically in that category, that we develop a mode or a persona or a part that will help us to adapt to the environment so that we can get our needs met. And that these modes, though, particularly to schema therapy, are not really us. With parts of self in Gestalt work and with IFS, they don't necessarily externalize those parts of self. They say those parts of self are good and they are important and a part of us, but we need to question whether or not they need to come forward at this moment, or we need to modify those parts. Whereas in schema therapy, generally speaking, they will say that the modes are maladaptive and the sooner we can get rid of them, the better. But at least that's my take on it. So my summary about AD is that she was loved by the audience from beginning to end. Because you had Trevor, who was loved by the audience in the beginning, at least according to the survey that I sent out, and not so liked in the end. I think Clay actually was not liked in the beginning and was liked more as the season went on. Whereas with AD, it was always Amy as well, and Johnny always loved. So I think that says something about her strengths and her likability, and the fact that she didn't have issues that other cast members would, like Laura or Sarah, this kind of thing. Now, I do think that she deserves to work on things. I don't know what those things are, but we heard a lot of Clay talking about how he has issues and he's wanting to work on them. And according to interviews post-season, he'll say that he's in therapy and working on those things. I didn't hear a lot of that talk from AD, and I don't know what that means. Maybe she doesn't have anything to work on, but if she does, I would hope that she knows she deserves to work on those things. I'm terribly sad that she got dumped at the altar. She deserves to have a loving and dedicated partner, and she took a chance with Clay, and I think that was smart. I think there was a lot of possibility there, and it just didn't work out. And but it was obviously painful, and she deserves someone that loves her and who is dedicated, where it's not a lot of work, where the person comes to them fully ready to get married. She deserves that, and I hope she gets it. Okay, let's move on to Chelsea and Jimmy, because they almost made it to the wedding. My final thoughts, I don't really have a lot to say about them that I haven't said already. I have talked about them a lot, so I'll just briefly summarize. Now, I'm not diagnosing anybody, but we did see themes of at least preoccupied attachments, possible characterological traits we can't know. We also saw hints of two modes that she might go into, both on the show and after the show in interviews and on her own TikTok channel, in which she has a mode that I think she's in normally, where she's very accommodating and trying to give the message that she's fine, everything's fine, it's all light, while also trying to communicate to the tremendous pain and fear that I think she's experiencing chronically. Like I watched one of her TikTok videos and she's just like, well, hey, y'all, I'm in therapy. Everything's fine, but, if her mode was really trying to trick everybody, then she wouldn't mention the pain and agony that she's going through. But she does. I think she's trying to alert other people, but it's veiled in the lightness of her tone. We saw this during the show, we see it off the show. So I think there's that mode that she's in normally where she's gripping the wheel, white knuckling. It was like, just hold on. Because I imagine, I don't know, but I think that she doesn't trust that she's good enough to be heard, I think, or that anyone can be trusted. So there's that mode. And then her other mode is perhaps her true self, which is coming from pain and from fear. And we saw those play out on the show where she would have a big fight. And she was intoxicated, but I think that's in her. Maybe exacerbated or pushed forward by alcohol or something. But we saw that mode. And then the next morning, we would see her be very polite and a tone of lightness, but also communicate. I'm reminded of that conversation they had, I think, after the second fight, and they're on the bed, and it's the morning, and I think Jimmy came back. Anyway, and she's totally fine. The tone is totally fine, but she's still communicating that things are not going well. That's what kind of looked to me. Now, for Chelsea, if my hypothesis is even close, I have tremendous hope for her. There are signs, it's hard to know, but there are signs that she's working on things. And, like she'll mention insecurity. She'll say that word, I think even during the season, but definitely after. And that's huge. The ability to admit that, the ability to admit it to yourself, the ability to admit it to the internet and to other people, that shows that she's already grown or comes to the table with a lot of strengths. I've treated people who present like her, and for some of them, it could take years for them to say that word out loud, even to me as their confidential, therapist. So I have a lot of optimism about it, but there's a lot of work to do if I'm close to the mark, which I can't know if I am. And I feel tremendous empathy for her, and I hope that was apparent in the way I was reacting. When people are hurting, it's natural for all of us to have empathy for that and sympathy for that. And with these sorts of folks, given the way that they present, and given our culture, it's hard for people to see the pain. But I've worked so closely with people that present like this that I've been in those trenches, and I can see the pain, or I'm thinking I see the pain. And thus it provokes empathy for me. For a lot of people, they don't see the pain. All they see is nagging, like Travis Kelce and Jimmy Fallon mocking her, being clingy. I don't think they see the pain. I hope they don't see the pain, because I would be very upset at those individuals for even doing that kind of stuff against someone that is feeling pain. And not a lot of people see the pain or distracted from the pain and will ignore the pain or attack her in spite of the pain. And I feel so bad for her. I would not have predicted that she would be the villain. If anything, I thought most people would be on her side, given history with other seasons and other shows. Not that that's necessarily a good thing, but I was not expecting her to be attacked the way that she has been. And I just think that is so horrible. On the surface, I would say that the attacking is waged against her by a mob of people that are evil, but they just don't see the pain, and we need to raise awareness. And I hope that I did. I don't need to raise the awareness for some of you, because but for those of you that might not have seen it in the entirety that it might exist, I would hope that we can all acknowledge the very strong possibility that enormous pain is there. And I said this before during my series that was focusing on them, that, or at least I think it did, that the sort of pain that she might be experiencing is 10 times worse than our worst painful moments. And she is feeling it almost all the time. I've worked with people like that, where it is constant. It's just, they're either feeling tremendous pain or they're experiencing overwhelmingly blinding pain. And they just go between those two. it's a very, very tough life with a lot of suffering. It can be soothed with specialized therapy and earned security. So I don't know if I'm seeing it right, but if that is somewhere close to the mark, that's how I feel about her. Now, regarding Jimmy, it's hard to know what's going on with him because of Chelsea's issues. Now, let's move on to Jimmy. So it's hard to know what's going on with him because I think Chelsea and her issues eclipsed his presentation. So it's hard to know. We also saw things post-season that indicate he has more issues than were presented on camera or in the edit, like the misrepresentation of Jessica, whether or not that was knowingly for him, where he knew he was fudging and lying or exaggerating, or if his brain distorts things that way. Either way, there's an issue there. And I think if he was distorting or motivated to exaggerate, I think it possibly does come from that guilt complex that I was seeing signs of early. In the pods, I think I saw signs of that. Like with Jess, when he shut down, I think he was feeling guilty. I think he had potential to love Jess in that moment when she was saying, hey, what's going on? And I think because of his guilt and worry that he had guilt about, was going to disappoint somebody here. And I think that guilt overwhelmed him and then he just shut down. Anyway, so, he's got some issues, but it's hard to know how they would play out in a relationship where someone else doesn't present as many blatant issues as Chelsea did. Maybe it would be handleable and manageable, but maybe not. Maybe he has that schema kick in often of guilt and will go on the attack. It's hard to say. But overall, I'm going to take a guess and say that he'll be fine. He seems to have been raised relatively well. But like I said, it's hard to know. And I do wish for him, like I do for everyone on the show, that they get their needs met. They deserve that. If that involves getting married, then I wish them the best for sure. All right, the next couple that made it the furthest is Laura and Jeremy. So let's talk about Laura first. With Laura, at first, I thought she had some issues in the pods when, because I didn't really know that much about Laura. The first moment where I saw her personality shine was when she hears from Chelsea that Jimmy told Chelsea that he loved her. And immediately, Laura pops up, runs over to Jess, and is saying, it's time to go. You need to go. Jess is like, well, okay, what happened? What happened? What do you know? And Laura's just like, you don't need to know. You just need to go. And I thought that was strange on a number of levels. Now, I don't know how Jess took it. She seemed, and I think in interviews might have said she was fine with it, but it looked strange. And I've been over all the different ways Laura could have approached that situation. And there's a way of interpreting it that is not great, that she would purposely try to get information from Chelsea and then run over. And anyway, now it's done from a place of love. She's trying to protect her friend from pain. Okay, so it's not like this evil act. But anyway, I just thought it was strange. It had a kind of Lydia vibe to it. But then I thought she seemed fine. Like with the beginning of their relationship, there seemed to be some very relatable things in there. Then the bean dip thing happens, and that was a big yikes to me. Then the next morning, Jeremy apologizes, and Laura, her reaction to it was, very mature and differentiated and caring. And I thought, oh, okay. Then I saw her ridicule him about his shirts, which at first seemed like a fun little inside joke, and then as time went on, it looked more cruel. And I'm not a fan of that kind of behavior. We see this. I see, like when Micah would do this to Paul, she would look in his closet. It'd be one thing if the guy thinks of himself as a fashion idiot or something. And I don't think Paul thought of himself as a fashion icon, but I definitely got the impression that Paul wasn't really on board with this notion that he's like a fashion idiot. I mean, Micah was just laughing and, oh my God, look at this. Oh, I can't believe. On the surface, Micah was laughing and there's affection there, but looking at the content, I'm just like, ugh. And Laura was doing that. It wasn't a high crime, but I just thought, maybe he likes Hawaiian. Who cares? Move on. It's no longer. It's not a personality to hate someone's Hawaiian shirts. It's just a goddamn shirt. And maybe it's important to him. Maybe he has. Who cares? It's just a fucking shirt. Move on. And it often is on these shows, 90 Day Fiancé included, where there's this notion that when it comes to men and their fashion and their home decor, that you don't have to be careful at all. We almost never see, in fact, I would guess we never see the opposite, where the guys on this show will heavily scrutinize the woman's dress and the woman, well, I guess we saw JP in the makeup, but not in this tone, where the men will heavily scrutinize the wardrobe and the cleanliness of the home. Think Stacy and the paper cups stuff. It was just like, I don't know if it's encouraged by the show or it's this cultural element that I'm not aware of, but if someone did that to me, I'd tell them to fuck off. I'd just be like, really? Let's go to your place. I'm sure I could find some shit to pick apart. You can certainly complain or have pointers, but this notion that you have this right to just call, what if everything you're pointing out are things that are very important to me? Now, with Cole and his disgusting toilet, okay, but still, even the tone of it, it's just, I've had women roommates that were some of the most disgusting people I've ever lived. In fact, I would say I've lived with a lot of roommates, and perhaps the grossest person I ever lived with was a woman. She was a great person. I never criticized her for it. I never but if it was disgusting to me in my early 20s, and I was disgusting in my early 20s. So this notion that men are just born slobs or women are just born clean, it just goes back to that saying that we used to say in the early 70s that I think was from the 20s. It's like, girls are sugar and spice and everything nice. Boys are puppy dog tails and other kind, I don't know, puppy dog tails, like detached. Anyway, it's upsetting. Now, the shirts thing, it's not a high crime. I'm just going to say that. It's just annoying. Then, so I'm the pendulum is swinging free. Then my contact tells me, because I'm asking her about the bean dip thing, and my contact says, "Oh no, she was joking. Laura was joking." And I thought, oh, maybe because I didn't know if she was joking or not, but I was thinking she might not have been joking, and I thought, oh, okay, well, my contact would know better than I would, so okay, she was joking. And then I see Laura getting dumped, and I'm thinking she handled that pretty well. She was upset, but she had every reason to be upset, and she didn't engage with him a lot. She just walked away eventually. And then at the lake party, she handled herself pretty well there too. And then, according to me, I think a lot of people were rubbed wrong by Laura throughout, that everything or most of the things she was doing was highly bothersome. I guess we should rewind the clock and look at her and Jess having that conversation and how Laura was very upset at Sarah for sending that DM, and then Laura and Jess basically saying it's okay for Jess to go after Jimmy. We could point to that anyway. But at the lake party scene, I was like, oh, she's relatable. There's a lot of criticism and vitriol that could be coming from her, and she's just not going to engage in that. Then I rewatched the bean dip thing, and it looked even more so that she was not joking at the time. I already went over that. So the pendulum swings. And then during the reunion, we see that scene that they reveal to us where there's Sarah and Laura talking, and Laura was being super cool in that moment, I thought. So then my pendulum swung back. So now I don't know what to think. I don't know what to think about Laura, honestly. I think she's a conundrum to me. I think that in summary, I would say there's likely some things that need to be ironed out for her in terms of her traumas and her schemas and her personality, her reactivity. But they're probably not severe things. They're probably within normal limits kind of stuff. And I wish her the best. Let's go on to Jeremy. So in reviewing, I'm taking notes as I'm going along here. And I'm reminded as I write it all out, or the story beats, I'm reminded of how problematic the behavior presented to us possibly is. It's hard to know, but so let's just kind of review the major story beats. You have his behavior the morning of breaking up with Laura and how callous he was. There was seemingly no empathy, zero remorse. And at the time, I thought, well, maybe this is a mustachioed worm kind of thing. It still doesn't make it okay, but at least there's some justification for the distortion, characterologically. Then we see him at the lake party, and he's like, she's trying to make me out to be a bad guy. We don't know the edit, blah, blah, blah. But I'm thinking, wow, you've had time to think about it. How do you not see yourself at least being partially the bad guy, given what you did with Sarah, even if it was innocent, which Laura would be... It would be silly for Laura at least not to wonder if the two of you got together. But even if that didn't happen, it's still, a problem. Plus, the way you reacted when you got home. Anyway, also, I was reminded, I didn't say this at the time, but at the lake party, when they're going on the ski-doos or whatever, Laura was at that party. You can hang out with Sarah in a lot of places. Why there? It's like the right thing to do. You just dumped her. She was engaged. So at the time, I remember wondering about whether Laura and Jeremy were really involved with each other, invested. After seeing Laura cry at the lake party, I think it points to the strong possibility, and hearing a lot of other things from people and herself, I think there's a strong possibility that she was mostly, if not fully, invested in that relationship. By the time she gets dumped, she might have had some major reservations, but I think for a time, Laura was in it to win it. So to have Jeremy and Sarah hanging out just days after Laura has been dumped in a pretty harsh way and a very callous way, it's again callous. Also, there's possibilities of some pretty major lies when you look at it. Lying about getting together with Sarah, who knows, could be a lie. He did lie about not dropping her out. He left that out. Then he lies at the reunion, basically saying that he wasn't lying at the time. And, there's a slight possibility that he actually believes that to be true. There's also talk from my contact that Jeremy was in contact with Sarah before the lake party to a greater extent. I don't know if that's true. Those aren't high crimes, but it's just more data to add to the picture. Now, I will say, and I said this during my reaction to the reunion, that Jeremy exhibited some fair behavior. He seemingly, who knows, genuinely apologized at least once. So he's not, in terms of the presentation, there's not all negatives, We also saw all that jokey stuff, which in light of all the things we know now, the jokey stuff could also be this way for him to poke at people without it looking like he's poking at people. People that want to poke at people will do that sometimes. So, I'm just joking. What are you saying? I'm just joking. Oh, you're an idiot. I'm just joking with you. That kind of stuff. Then, and also like this comfort or need or something with making other people uncomfortable, that you're okay with being jokey and receiving a very clear message from the person you're engaged with that she's not enjoying it, and you continue anyway, and you like it, and you lean into it. Yikes. Then so that was all happening, and I'm already yikes. Then the allegations from that woman on TikTok We don't know. Could be all fabricated. Who knows? It's not entirely fabricated because he confirmed a lot of the details, including that the police showed up that night. But her story of jealousy and abuse and control and rage and threatening her with a gun, my God. Then his response, which, if we believe him, then we just have a guy that was a dick to Laura, seemingly, in the edit. If we don't believe him, which it's hard to believe him, and I've heard other professionals, legal professionals, and who knows, review the response from him, and they'll say there's a lot of questionable things in there. We can't know, but like I said in my reaction video, you have to believe too many weird things to believe anything that Jeremy is saying. It doesn't mean that those things aren't all true. Sometimes they are. But you have to believe so many anomalous things, so many things that would not likely happen, but could happen. So it's hard to believe him. And if he is lying, if we just say, well, let's operate from that assumption. We can't know, but as a thought experiment, let's operate from that assumption that he was lying in that response video. Well, then we see someone that's very comfortable lying. Someone that is throwing up a classic, maybe even psychopathically classic smokescreen by, doing everything that he can to throw doubt into every single allegation, and seemingly very sure of himself. Because typically, if someone was lying, there would be a different demeanor. We don't know if he's lying, but if he is, for other people who have a different sort of personality, they would be more sheepish or, I don't know, smarter about the lies. Because the case that he makes, even if it's true, it's not a strong case. It doesn't have a lot of details to it. Anyway, I can't know. And then at the end of his response video, that aggressive manner, that tone, that demeanor that he had, he's looking straight into the camera. And I don't know, for me, I could feel it. The dominance, the threat in his eyes. I can't know anything. But I've worked with people who present with the hypothesis that could be applied here. And I know what they look like. And I know how they present. And the check marks that I've tentatively penciled in are numerous. And this is quite possibly the highest level yikes that I could ever say on this channel. In terms of reaction videos, there's other people. But someone sent me this fan art of the scale of yikes. It's actually on my office door for me. But at the far end of the scale, beyond like the most yikes, is Ash's seminar, if you remember from 90 Day Fiancé from 2020. I literally fell out of my chair watching Ash's seminar. It was so silly and unscientific and sexist against everybody, and also just poorly delivered that I was like cringing so hard I literally fell out of the seat. I've never done that actually in any other situation. So, they put that at the biggest yikes. This yikes is light years beyond that. It's not even in the same category. So, yikes. All right, I'm just going to briefly talk about the rest of the folks here because there's not as much data. With Britney and Kenneth, I don't really know what to say about the two of them. They both seem like, in terms of the data, and we didn't get much, they both seem like fine people. I'm sure they have issues like everyone else does, but they weren't really presented in an obvious way. There are some things that you could point out about Kenneth, like being on his phone and that kind of stuff, but he has, in a post-season interview, said that he really reacted to that interview, and he cringes at himself. And I think it would be strange to go on a show like this and to not cringe at yourself for at least one or two things, if not 10 things. And he didn't blame anybody for it. So there's that. I think there's a lot of speculations about who was unattracted to who, and I've heard different accounts of they're having broken up off camera and then recreated it on camera, but then maybe that's not true. And then there are, I think even Britney herself has come forward in post interviews saying that actually she was the one that broke up with him. It wasn't the other way. And that in that moment that we see, that was a genuine moment. And for Kenneth saying, like, look, for you, not for, meaning that she was the one that lost attraction for him. I don't know. I think it, from the looks of it, was a very normal situation where you hit it off at first, even outside of the pods, like just in regular dating. And then when it comes time to, because for some couples, as they're dating, they will wait for physicality to even be a question mark. And it's more about personalities and values at first, right? I mean, some people jump in the sack right away, and that's fine. But for some couples, so I think this is a typical, or not a typical, but a common enough scenario where you bond emotionally and value-wise, and then you start to get to the physical stuff, and you just find it hard to fit things in, so to speak. And then feelings get hurt, and there's distance and like bids and awkwardness, and then at some point someone pulls the plug, and the other person kind of knows it's coming, and there's pain on both sides, but there's no harm, no foul. That's the way it looked to me. Okay, so let's talk about Matthew, and I'm just going to throw out an hypothesis that I wrote out just now that has been germinating in my mind for a while now. So there are some people, for various reasons, who have trouble managing social situations. Sometimes it's autism spectrum, sometimes it's something else, but let's go with that possibility. And for people like this, they sometimes realize as they're growing up that they tend to get strange reactions from other people when they attempt to socialize, like at school or whatever. And they might get told that they're socially awkward, or even that they're socially harmful or socially terrible or something. And they were confused to begin with, and now they're even more confused, and they're more concerned, and they have a choice to make. They can either just retreat entirely, or they can try to figure out a solution to the problem. But the basis of their problem is at least partially fueled by the fact that they don't really understand as quickly as other people do regarding how to interact, regarding what other people might be experiencing, regarding how they might be coming across. It's harder for them. And so the solutions are also going to be hard. But they don't want to bother other people. And generally speaking, most people like this, they want to be liked, and they want to have friends. They want romantic partners. Not all of them, but many of them do, just like everybody else. So they not only are trying to avoid bothering others, but they're also deeply and desperately trying to get their needs met. So they might find going on a show like Love is Blind to be appealing to them, because there won't be all the distractions that they might understand for themselves interfere with social situations. Distractions for themselves, distractions for the other people. They might also predict, reasonably correctly, that, well, maybe in the pods, things might go better for me because we're expected to have these longer conversations. I'll be given a chance to prove that I am well-intentioned and I am likable, that I do have something to offer. Because in the real world, I'll often get immediate rejection based on me being kind of awkward in the beginning. And maybe the pods, people will give me more time to prove that I can be likable. And so, before going on the show, they might do their homework, so to speak, and they might think about how they want to come across, because they know that if they don't do their homework, it'll raise the risk of them alienating other people like they have done so often. And so you might develop questions in advance. You might even talk with people in your life. What sort of questions? You might look online. And so you write out the questions, because then you'll know I have that to fall back on. You know, as a podcaster, I can very much relate to this, that I want things to be off the cuff, like what I'm doing right now. I want things to be off the cuff. I don't want to just be reading a script. But unless I write out a script or an outline, I will worry that I'm going to go off script and I'm not going to say all the things I want to say, or I'm going to get lost or whatever. So it's normal to prepare like that. And if there's a lot at stake and you know from experience that things often don't go well, maybe they don't go well because of you. Maybe they just go well because of misinterpreting your behavior. But either way, you try to do your homework, so you write out some questions. And the questions might go well, but then people might turn the question on you. And since, again, you have a hard time knowing the landscape socially, and also because you only had enough time or enough effort to plan for part of the task, which was to have the questions and ask them, and you're overwhelmed with the situation, when people go off script for you by asking the question to you, you just try to shut it down. It's too much. And so you say, I'm not going to answer that question. Or you do it at least one time in the pods and it gets edited in. So that's what happens. But overall, you're seemingly hitting it off with a couple people, and you're highly encouraged by that. Also, when you're talking to one person, the speakerphone isn't working. And so you walk out of the pods and you say something like, it's like talking to a wall. And then that gets edited in as a way to make you look like a horrible person. But really what's happening is it was like talking to a wall. You couldn't hear each other, which apparently happens. And then this individual starts having feelings for someone, and the feelings are overwhelming like it would for anybody. And then you realize that you're having feelings for two people, and you realize that these two people have feelings for you. And you are overwhelmed, as anyone would be. Jimmy was overwhelmed with this. Everyone gets overwhelmed. They should be overwhelmed. And also, you're used to things not going well. So you don't want to necessarily let go of one person, even though you might know you like another person more. But who knows? At any rate, when you're on a date with one of them, and maybe with AD, you're having more of that feeling earlier, which you could imagine given the way AD comes across. I think, given her fix-a-hoe thing and how comfortable she is in the role of helping someone, you could see him responding to her pretty quickly, right? But you feel those feelings with AD, and Amber, he's not feeling those feelings as much. And then he wants to express those feelings to her, as anyone would. But he doesn't have fluid, creative, spontaneous language around it, because that's hard for him to do. He knows he's feeling it, so he will pull common phrases or tropes or certain things that he's heard other people say, hallmark kind of phrases, like, I want to ask your dad for your hand, or I want to whisk you away. Things that you rely on or are newly relying on in situations like this, and you say those things and you mean them. And then when you hang out with a bunch of random guys that you've never met before in a lounge, you just say, I need to remain quiet, because I know from experience that if I try to interact, particularly in a chaotic environment with 14 other random guys who all are fairly adept at socializing with each other, I will lose. Something bad will happen. I'll alienate somebody. So I should just remain quiet. Also, when I stick my head out, sometimes I get bullied. So if I just am invisible and I don't bother anybody and I don't say anything, then I'll be safe and I can't be criticized because I'm not bothering anybody. Plus, I'm using all my energy in the pods. I don't have any more energy left. I can only put energy into that. Afterwards, I just have to relax. There's no way I'm going to be able to exert that much energy into socializing with everybody here. So I'll pick and choose my battles. And then time goes on. Maybe it's even a couple days later, and he starts to think, actually, I think I'm in love with Amber and not AD. That happens, right? And who knows in the edit, but he doesn't know how to navigate that maybe, and doesn't know to tell AD. Maybe even he thinks, well, I know because I hear Clay talking about AD that Clay and AD are really hitting it off, so I can avoid that complicated conversation with AD. Who knows? But he feels that love with Amber and tells her. And in the moment, he means it, just like he meant it with AD. But if he could articulate himself, he would say, maybe like Johnny would, Johnny and Izzy and Chris, that he would say, no, this time it's for real. With the AD, that felt real, but no, this time it's real. I'm in love. I'm this close to getting engaged. How do I express it? He expresses it. He recalls those phrases that really fit his heart in the past, 2 days ago, maybe. And it seemed to work. So people understood what he was trying to communicate. He says those exact same phrases again. And then the next day, he's informed that the love of his life has left, has ditched him, has just walked out. And he's thinking, wait, I'm the villain now? That's the narrative that's happening. What's happening? And there's all sorts of anxiety and stress and pain. And you might start to soothe yourself, try to soothe yourself. And you might mumble to yourself. And again, not reading the room. And you might start saying, well, maybe I'll be seen as the underdog, and then everyone won't hate me, and I won't be ostracized and bullied and hated and labeled and isolated yet again. It's happening again. I did it again. The world is doing it to me again. Distress, pain, anxiety. What do I do? Maybe the world see me as an underdog. And yeah, that'll happen, and everything will work out okay. And you're overwhelmed, and AD is now still kind of here, and so you start to interact with her, and you're thinking, well, maybe with AD, but maybe even he was under the impression that AD wasn't that in love with him. Maybe as he expressed himself, AD was appreciative, but wasn't as reciprocal as he was hoping it to be. And so he's getting some indication that maybe AD is into him. So he starts to, walk his way through what might be happening. So he's like, you like me, you want to be with me. And then he checks in with himself and says, I don't know. I got to get out of here. Or maybe even he's thinking, well, Amber was the one. There's no point sticking around. I'm an idiot. This is happening all over again. I just should go. And then you leave. That is a fucking possibility. Right? That could have happened. And yet, you look at the situation, and especially in the edit, but even if it's not edited in a poor way, I mean, I guess you could argue that if he wasn't walking out on Sarah as she was going on, and even she admitted that she talks a lot, but still, you don't just walk. It's possible that that was fabricated in the edit, that he was literally talking to a wall because the speakerphone wasn't working. My contact said that happens sometimes. And if they primed us with that, because the way it looked was very, very harsh. And then when you see that bit, they show us that early, and then you turn on him, right? You think, oh, he's a jerkface. So everything that happens after that is filtered through that. And the questions, and you're like, oh, okay. And then you get asked the question back, and he says, oh, I don't answer those questions. And what's particularly heartbreaking about people with this type of issue is that the ways out of these awkward situations is further hampered by the situation itself. They're operating from a place where it's hard for them, and I could go into detail about the theory and also the variation as to why these folks, whether it's autism spectrum or otherwise, where they have a hard time navigating social situations. I could go into detail on that. There's a lot of neurology, a lot of theory, a lot of experiences, a lot of variation, like I said. But for these people in general, when a problem is created or is furthered by their issues, and they try to get out of it because they see a reaction from the other person, because they have a hard time navigating it, they have a hard time even navigating how to respond, right? So it just compounds. So like if he's already in an awkward space asking the question and it's already coming across as a little strange, like I guess if we try to figure out when he said, well, someone else picked that, that's strange, or can't you pick another one? It could literally have been in his head. This is a bit of a stretch, but it's possible that he's working out the homework and he's thinking, okay, I want to make sure that all the questions get asked. He did have 15, right? So, and there are 15 people. Who knows? But he might have really kind of got locked in on, okay, the way this is going to work is if I ask questions, because I've heard and I have prepared questions and have been told by other people that they're good questions, and each person is going to ask for a different question. Or maybe even for himself, he's like, I'm going to ask each person a different question. Maybe even, this is speculative, maybe he's thinking, if I ask all 15 people a different question, then it won't come across like I'm being impersonal. But then something happens along the way, and he's just like, maybe I'll give them a chance. And then he's kind of locked in. I don't know. Who knows? Point is that there could be something going on there. I have people in my life who have this issue, whether they're in my life professionally or personally. And what I have found with these folks is that when they bump up against some of these issues, they can sometimes come across as prickly when it doesn't call for it, and they don't even really mean it, but they're just so frustrated that they will have a prickliness to it, and they don't know how to communicate themselves effectively. They don't know always how they're coming across to other people. They don't even know how to interpret pushback, right? If someone were to say, hey, I didn't appreciate that one thing, or hey, some sort of feedback, because they are already having a hard time interpreting things, they might interpret the feedback wrong and blow it out of proportion, which makes them think like, oh, well, you're going to be a dick, I'll be a dick back. There's a lot of potential, pitfalls within the sequence of communication, particularly as complicated as the communication would be in the pods. And so it's possible that as he's interacting with people, there's an anger that comes out, frustration, and a way of communicating it that isn't adept, like when you look at a 5-year-old, and these people aren't 5-year-olds. I'm just saying, if we look at a 5-year-old as an analogy, and you're with the 5-year-old and you are a family friend or you're an aunt or an uncle, and you bring the kid as a favor to the playground because the kid really loves the playground, and you're feeling all good about yourself because you're hanging out with your niece and you feel like you're being a good aunt or uncle, and the kid's playing, and then you say, okay, well, we got to go in an hour, but let's have fun. And then an hour comes on, oh, we got to go, and the kid's like, oh, I want to stay. And then you say, okay, well, yeah, we're having great, let's stay another hour. You stay another hour. And at the end of that hour, you're like, okay, we definitely have to go now because your parents want you back home and I got to get going. And it's not unheard of to have a 5-year-old get angry at you and get frustrated, have a mini little tantrum. It's not universal, but I don't think, or I hope people wouldn't fault a 5-year-old for having that moment of like, I never get to go. Hopefully you wouldn't take it personally. Again, people with this problem that I'm, generally saying is trouble with social situations are not children. But it's a normal human reaction to have this frustration. What we do with that as adults is we will use our maturity and our executive function and our internal monologue to manage it. So we're 35 and we're hanging out with our friend, and our friend says, yeah, I got to go. And you have that same feeling of hurt or frustration or whatever. But very quickly, your higher mind kicks in and says, well, don't throw a temper tantrum, but maybe you do want to communicate it, and you say it in a different way. And you say, oh, really? I kind of thought we were going to hang out longer, but no big deal. But you got to promise me that we hang out longer next time because I really like hanging out with you. Okay. It generates from the same feeling. It just comes out very, very differently. For people who are having trouble developing those social skills, their repertoire, their Rolodex of options is far fewer than other people their age. And so they run into a situation and they, run through their Rolodex and there's, I don't really have any, and they just react from that feeling that we all have, but it doesn't have any of the social niceties or any of the floweriness or any of the skill that adults will have typically when they're faced with those feelings. You also potentially have a hard time even understanding the feelings or dealing with the feelings, because the feelings for some can be overwhelmingly felt and very quickly in the moment, and would challenge anybody to manage the landscape there. So to me, when I started to gravitate towards this hypothesis, it started happening before the reunion, and I just thought, oh, it could have been this. And I remember kind of considering this during the pods, but most of me was just not in that headspace. And I think at the very least, the fact that it didn't occur to me as much is a problem for me. I know for many other people, they were thinking the same thing. I also think it has to do with the bone I have to pick with clinicians, but also the society at large, that will apply the label of autism spectrum to anybody with any social awkwardness, particularly if they are nerdy in a certain way, the way that Matthew is. I've been dealing with that for so long, decades, and at first I would go along with it, and it's only gotten worse over time, especially online. And I just, whenever that thought even occurs within my own mind, I'll say like, shut up, don't do that thing. And that's a problem because it's preventing me from having options available to me when I'm conceptualizing. As a clinician, that's important for me to have. I would like to think clinically that wouldn't happen because I'm not really in that mode as a therapist who's assessing someone. I think, but I don't know, maybe. I have a similar problem with everyone labeling everything as ADHD, and I have to keep that in check. I think that the criticism or the problem that I have with that is justified, but I can't just blanketly reject all thoughts along those lines, you know? The other thing I'll say is that the show, the way that it's edited and presented, and particularly if it's edited in a deceptive way, like with the talking to the wall bit, it'd be hard to have that hypothesis emerge unless you're living in that world or you're actively looking for it. Also, I will say that it's just an hypothesis. There's, I don't know what percentage likelihood, but there's also a likelihood that none of this applies and that there's something else entirely that I didn't even think of, you know? I mean, the only other alternative hypothesis is that I was basically hinting at, I think, if not flat out saying, which pains me to think about. Because it'd be fine if I put forward that hypothesis. It's another thing to not counter it with the hypothesis I'm putting out now. But, you know, I think what I was saying was that he knows that he's lying and that he is either inadvertently or on purpose using manipulative, abusive tactics that are highly concerning. That's still possible. Both could be possible. You can have someone on the autism spectrum who is abusive. It's not an either or. So we could see the hypothesis that I laid out here regarding social awkwardness and all the complications that happen from that. And I hope that in my description that is seen, right? It's not just, oh, you're socially awkward. Like, it comes with it a lot of additional issues that compound the problem or will complicate the problem. You know, it's much deeper than, there's a history there always for these folks that will give them schemas and fears. Anyway, so all that could be true, along with that manipulative tactic of talking to her and trying to draw, along with even lying, with knowingly telling two people the same thing. And perhaps, I guess in this world, he did have feelings for the two, but didn't care enough to inform them both, or that he had feelings for both, or whatever. You know, you can have some problems with your personality and your compassion or your empathy for others, the same way that anyone else can, right? So, but to me, it's satisfying to have this as an hypothesis because it fits much more to the data for me. And I do remember saying this a lot, that even if it was lying, it was very strange behavior, right? The mumbling to himself and all that. When you look at other people who seemingly have issues, you know, someone like Shake, it presents in a more understandable way. The way that Matthew was presenting, if we go down that road of lack of empathy and or abusive impulses, there were so many other things that just didn't add up. Whereas this hypothesis that I'm putting forth today, it all adds up. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's even in the ballpark, but it's just satisfying to me when I can find an hypothesis that makes sense. Okay. So briefly wrapping up the final thoughts, Amber, not really much to say. I will say that it was notable that she bounced right away. I think at the time I thought good for her, but then also I'm wondering, was that too quick, too hasty? I don't know. I mean, she certainly deserves to do that, but what if Matthew genuinely actually liked her? And my hypothesis put forward today is close to the mark. Was that hasty? I don't know. Jessica, I will say, as I've said for a while now, that she's exhibited a lot of maturity, a lot of health, even though she has one of the worst backstories, childhood-wise, I've ever heard of. And I'm a therapist, so it's saying a lot. I mean, I've certainly treated people with her background, but the brief overview of what she went through all the way up until she was in her late teens, it's astonishing how well that she's doing in spite of that. So I have, as I think a lot of people, I think a lot of people would hope the best for her, as I do. Trevor, I've recently gone over my hypothesis about him, and I will add that on a podcast, Clay said he was on a podcast with Angela Yee, and Clay said that casting interviews started all the way back in October of 2022. And the cast were informed they might be on the show months later in March of 2023. And then filming happened shortly after. So Clay was saying he didn't think that Trevor should have been forced to break up with the woman that he was with because no one knew they were going to be on the show until just before filming. And I think that adds to my tentative, hypothesis, which is one of a number of hypotheses about Trevor, in that Trevor could have been with this woman and they both could have agreed that they were in a toxic relationship and they had a hard time staying away from each other because at the very least he can't be alone and is too afraid to let go. And he hears about this show and he probably thinks, well, there's not a high likelihood I'm going to actually go on the show. I'm being recruited for it. Who knows? That happens in October. He stays with the woman, again, maybe on and off there as well. He's thinking, but maybe I could actually find someone. And he's probably, maybe both of them have tried to date other people or bouts of that or whatever, but then they always come back to each other. And so this is just another version of that. She knows he's going to go on the show. She knows there's a possibility he might find someone. And in her heart, she both doesn't want that, but also wants that for the same reason I think that Trevor went on the show, that she's like, maybe this will be good, that he'll find someone and I'll be forced to end this relationship. And then he, in March of 2023, he's told, according to Clay, that you might be on the show. They're not even told they're going to be on the show. And then maybe weeks later or something, they're told they're going to be on the show. And then they're on the show like pretty quickly after that. And then he's still in that relationship with that woman and whatever else is going on, because why change that? I mean, of course, I think healthy-wise, he would agree he should have changed that a long time ago, but that's a separate topic. And then he even holds on to the relationship until the last moment as he's getting on the plane. Particularly that moment was like, oh no. What if she leaves me? I can't have her leave me, even though consciously he'd be like, well, I hope that we can stay friends, but I kind of hope we both lose each other because our relationship is, So there's that. And like with Matthew, this hypothesis fits more of the data and is a much more common scenario than Trevor is a psychopathic con artist that wakes up in the morning trying to harm others. That's the only other well, I guess there's another possibility where he's either lying to the woman, like through his teeth, or he's lying to Chelsea, or both. I think most people think both. That is a possibility, but that kind of behavior is concerningly common in terms of lying and cheating. But in that way would require such a personality or such denial or something. Again, it's possible. I've seen it before, obviously, but it's rarer in my mind and according to the research. Sarah, not much more to say about her in my final thoughts. I think she has an issue with apologizing, although she did approach Laura fairly well. She has an issue with talking too much, which could be either out of anxiety or out of self-centeredness. Hard to say. I imagine that she'll be okay if she can grow a little bit more, a little bit of therapy. Mackenzie, I would say about Mackenzie, it's 100% always wrong to pee in a pool. It just is. Unless it's an emergency or it's your own pool and no one else is getting in, or everyone else that's getting in the pool knows and is into that kind of thing, it's not hard to get up and go to the bathroom. And that does it for my final thoughts. I'm joking about Mackenzie. Well, I'm not really joking. I'm sure Mackenzie's fine. That's all I know about her. And it did seem like there was a HAPA person, Amy C. She seemed HAPA. I'm looking at my notes. It's kind of bummed that she didn't make it through. Everyone, wow, what a journey. If you've watched all the videos, which I'm guessing some of you have, I was thinking about this today, that if you've watched all those videos, it's like we've been at camp and we've been bonding this whole time. If you've ever been to camp like for a few days, or like in the pods, how close they become in the lounge, that kind of thing. Like, I imagine that, we've gone on a journey together. And I think as a community as well, just the larger Love is Blind viewership community, in this world where all content is so varied and available and no one's watching the same things, it's nice sometimes, like with sports, to have something like Love is Blind where we all watch it together and feel like we're not alone. We can all do this together. I guess for me, in terms of time and place, it's been great for me now because it affirms, I think, the next chapter of my career, where I put out a lot of content around Love is Blind and not otherwise. I'm not happy about that. If I had a clone, I would be much happier that could do all that I used to do. But as an experiment for in 2024, I decided I was going to scale back at least some of the time. And I thought, well, maybe it'll be during the months that I'm not watching Love is Blind, that's when I'll scale back. And I also kind of wondered how it would feel to make a lot of content once Love is Blind is back on the air. And it's been really enjoyable. I think I was getting a little burnt out by how much I was working before. And I have felt none of that because I feel invigorated by the 6 weeks I had in January and the beginning of February, where I was working a little less. I was still working like 40, 50 hours a week, but it wasn't 70 hours a week. And also, I know after this video right here, I think anyway, the pace won't be as much, and I'll be able to get to all those things that I want to get to. Again, still working 40, 50 hours a week, but at least having some time to get chores done or hang out with my family or whatever. And it's not like I haven't been hanging out with my family, but not nearly as much as I want to. Also, my health, not being able to actually, I've been over that. But this series, this experience for me feels good, and I'm optimistic about how I fit into content provision on the internet. And also, there were a lot of things that I kind of experimented with. Like I started doing more YouTube lives. I started having some one-off episodes that were just for members. There's little differences in my approach to doing this kind of thing to see how things fit, and it was fun. It seems weird that I would do more YouTube lives while I'm doing so much work, but it kind of made sense to me because there's so much interaction. I want actually more direct interacting instead of just the comments, and a lot of you would oblige that. It also gave a chance to just talk about something other than Love is Blind, because no one ever asked about it. I don't know if people didn't ask because they didn't want to spoil or they were getting enough of me about that, but there weren't any questions that I could see that were about. It was always just general kind of stuff. But yeah, if you've watched the whole series or a lot of the series, I see you, and I feel it. I thank you. If we were in person, like in my regular life as a professor, we'd have a little moment after class or whatever of shooting the shit, and where I get to ask you questions. And you get to show me a picture of your cat, and I will say that cat looks adorable, or whatever. And this season was also good in that and I was telling my contact on the show that season 6, I think, redeems Love is Blind, because you had season 1, 2, 3, and 4, which were all pretty good and similar in tone. And then you had season 5, and you wonder, are we seeing the decline of Love is Blind? And then you have season 6, and you think, oh, it's back. And it's actually a really good season. They seem to be learning, I think. And that's great, because I think I've realized that this season, that Love is Blind is my favorite thing to watch, independent of this channel, because it does seem more real. I have faith that this show, at least for the near future anyway, will continue on the current trend. And they also don't seem to be descending, in my opinion. Some people don't, a lot of people don't believe this, but that they're not descending into sensationalism. They're holding on to why the show was popular to begin with by not going down those roads of silliness and shenanigans and purposely drumming up drama. Do they do that to some extent? At the very least, in the edit, it seems like they do. But overall, far less than other shows, in my opinion. So, I'm encouraged by that. I read online that the next season is going to be in December, which is a ways off. I'm also looking forward to Queer Love season 2, and I read online that they started recruiting for that like at the end of 2023, which means maybe they would start shooting in the winter, which means it wouldn't come out till 2025, but maybe sooner than that, hopefully. I don't know. Yeah, I just want to thank you if you're still watching at this point. Oh my goodness. And it means a lot to me. It really does. You give me purpose. You give me meaning in my life. I want to talk about the things that I talk about to attempt to make the world a better place. And if you weren't watching, then it would be harder for me to enact that purpose. I don't know if I make the world a better place. I can never know that, but I know that I'm trying in my way. And if you weren't watching, I would not be able to have that purpose met. And that is huge. That's one of the most important gifts anyone could give me, is the ability to feel like I'm living. When I am about to die, I can say, I gave it my best shot. You are giving me that gift. That's a bit morbid way of looking at it, but you know what I'm saying. So thank you, truly. And take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You truly, truly do.